Number 8 in our video series on outgrowing outworn worldviews, let's talk about myth and mythology. What do those have to do with worldviews? So there's a bias in our culture, in Western, Northern culture, that a myth is something that we eventually dispense with, that it gives way before science, that it's a form of collective superstition. Some people still hold on to it, and so on and so forth. So that's not the understanding of myth that people like Carl Jung, Joseph Campbell, Christine Downing, Hermann Hesse, and a number of others have, because a myth is more like a collective piece of psychology. So just as we have dreams as individuals, so we have myths as cultural groups. And the old stories have a lot of wisdom embedded in them. I sometimes teach a little class on nature myths from around the world, and we look at some of the ecological insights that are in the stories. Even in folk tales and fairy tales, there's plenty of examples of where the animals give wise advice to people. If you listen with a symbolic ear, you can hear some of the wisdom and the advice that's given. So let's talk a little bit about what myth has to do with all this. I've been kind of using mythology and philosophy in terms of a guiding set of stories and worldview interchangeably. So we need to be more explicit about myth. So myth is, as I've been saying, more than superstition and untruth. It's a set of stories that we engage with emotionally and imaginatively as well as intellectually. And the idea that a myth is a form of explanation is a projection of our kind of thinking back onto or over onto people who hold myths as wisdom stories. It's important to understand that. There are values, lessons. There is what the culture doesn't look at. So for instance, in ancient Greek culture, there were all those powerful goddesses, Athena and Artemis and others. And yet in Greek society itself at that time, women's role was quite diminished, important, but diminished in the sense that women were not allowed to vote in the polis, and were supposed to stay at home most of the time and things like that. So oftentimes the myths show us what's missing from collective consciousness that needs to be there. So myths have an important function for that. And also myth, it's not something we can get away with. The golden calf is alive and well here in the US. It probably always has been, or at least the last couple hundred years. But now we've got the AI craze, and so if you read the old stories about the golem, the autonomous being who carries out everything with literal-minded ferocity, even to the point of doom, you get a better understanding of what AI is all about from a mythic perspective. Yesterday it was angels, today it's UFOs. The old patterns tend to repeat. So the more conscious we are of them, the better off we are with how we navigate through life. So I'm thinking of a whole cycle of myths as something like a saga, a vision, collective dreaming. And there's a number of philosophers who said we need more conscious myths. We need new myths because the old ones are worn out. The old big stories are worn out. Here's a few examples. I made a little list here because that's what I do. Schlegel, Novalis, Hesse, Schelling, Holderlin, Thomas Berry talks about big stories. So does Brian Swim. P.J. Manny, the science fiction author and futurist, talks about the need for a new mythos. I recommend her work. And there's others. So a new big story. And there's a quotation I especially like from Leslie Marmon Silko. We are all part of the old stories. Whether we know the stories or not, the old stories know about us. So this isn't something that goes away. Now, in terms of worldview building or mythology building, there's a guide with Joseph Campbell. He talks about 4 functions that myths provide. I think there's actually more than that, but 4 is handy. So myths for Campbell provide a sociological function. What that means is norms and values, expectations, how to behave with each other. They provide a pedagogical function, so they help us with transitions through the entire span of life. Think about rituals of getting into adulthood, so in any culture. Myths have a cosmological function. In other words, they tell us what's around us, what's here. And Campbell felt that a lot of that is now being provided by science. And finally, the mystical function of myth, which puts us in touch with the sacred, with feelings like awe and wonder and gratitude. So an adequate worldview or an adequate mythology would need to have all those, but myths eventually wear out, especially when they're held literally. So what seems to happen all the way back to the distant past is there's a group of people, sometimes a majority, who think of the myths very literally. So a cloud flashes and, oh, that's Thunderbird. And then within the same culture, there's often a smaller group who says, no, there's no literal bird in the cloud. It's a wisdom story that explains our connection to the natural world. So I'm thinking in terms of a mythology for our time that wouldn't be literal. It would be something more like a guiding set of fictions, more like inspiring stories. And there are people who actually use fiction for that now, and I'm going to say something about that in the next video. But maybe be thinking, if you're interested in this, about what an adequate mythology of our time would actually look like, and how it might be post-literal, so not actual belief in whatever, doctrines or what have you, but also post-belief itself. I mentioned in the last video that absolute belief is something that operates as a defensive structure that creates conflict and paranoia. So what if to be a mature adult, a mature human being, we give up absolute belief? There's a line from Frank Herbert's Dune books that often comes to mind here. The mind of the believer stagnates. It ends inquiry, it ends exploration. So next time, let's talk a little bit about fiction as a component of a worldview that would serve our time.